And aside from that, I don't see any evidence of these charities being touted by anyone else except for Tony Cochran. But let's go back and validate another claim here. Tony Cochran has denied being another person, and that person goes by the name of Eilif Verney Elliott. Now, if you recall from near the beginning of the video, Verney Elliott is the surname of Tony Cochran's life partner. So I was very intrigued when I found a blog post calling him out and saying that he is actually Eilif. This blog post was written in March 15th of this year. It says here, some readers of this blog may recall someone named Eilif Verney Elliott in the UK who accused me of being a Nazi because I read Heidegger. He even challenged me to a public debate in London at one point, a call I obviously ignored. He put up several YouTube videos accusing OOO of complicity with fascism, etc., etc. Well, there's been an interesting twist in the saga of this gentleman. One longtime reader of this blog informs me that Eilif Verney Elliott seems to be the alias of one Tony Cochran, recently convicted of the fraudulent practice of, quote, radical existential psychoanalysis, end quote. More than that, he talked his patient into moving in with her as part of the treatment, tried to steal money from her credit card, and made false claims of sexual assault against her. I suppose there could be two separate people named Eilif Verney Elliott, though it seems unlikely. Addendum: this is definitely the same guy, now that I've had the chance to compare the two sets of videos. Ooh, that's very interesting because I have some proof that this guy is actually telling the truth here. Let me show you what I mean by that. So when we go over to Eilif Verney Elliott's WordPress page, we find this on the About page. Now, if you look at this picture right here, you might be saying, well, Devil, what exactly is that supposed to be telling us? Well, look at this picture here from the Ham and High article, where Tony Cochran is showing off his quote-unquote African charity. Do you see that picture? Does that person look familiar? Here, let me help you out here. I'm gonna put the pictures side by side, and I want you to tell me in the comment section, do they share a striking similarity? And if you can't see it, I have a wonderful eye doctor that I can refer you to. Now, you may be asking, what exactly does this prove? And why is this a problem? Well, let me show you why it is a problem. Tony Cochran goes around spreading good reviews of his writing. If you look at this one other WordPress blog, he says here on April 19th, 2013 at 7:52 p.m. my time. Okay, so there is a lot of buzzing and humming about a philosopher guy named Eilif Verney Elliott. What is his deal? I have tried to look at his material, but it seems to be an edit or something. I went on campus today here in California and the whole department was talking about him. Even the director of the department. Who is he? Now, first of all, there is no evidence showing that Tony Cochran has ever been to California. He's from Oregon, and I've seen no record of him ever attending a school in California. But I digress. He goes on to say just 1 minute later, oh, and where does he work? I presume that unlike a lot of us here, he has a cushy job in England, presumably. Oh, but then someone right beneath him calls him out on it. They say, would it be too much to accuse, quote, Tony Cochran, end quote, of being, quote, Eilif Verney Elliott, end quote, and that he is running some sort of guerrilla marketing campaign? Evidence? Read the comments. So not only has multiple people called him out on faking being someone that he's not, he even tries to boost his own work on other people's WordPress blogs. And that's really interesting because when you look at the website Indiegogo and you try to search out these charities that Tony Cochran keeps bringing up and collecting money for, it makes you wonder if these charities are actually real. Well, freaks and geeks, I did my own investigation. I scoured the internet and found no record of any of these charities that Tony Cochran is talking about except on Indiegogo. And I've seen no evidence that any of that money was going to Africa or Liberia. So let me get this straight. Somebody who is a convicted thief and a fraud stole money from people and was convicted of that crime. And then on top of that, I've had multiple people come to me saying that he's done the exact same thing to them. He pretends to be somebody that he's not to boost his own work. He's a liar and is someone that you would have to be insane to trust. Do you honestly think that even one of those charities is actually legit? Because if you do, I have some unicorn horns and some Enron stock that I want to sell you. So then the question becomes, why would he have to lie and pretend to be somebody that he's not in order to make his writings look better? Well, the reason for that is that his writing is absolute garbage. Remember when I said that I would actually go through some of his writings? I will go through a small piece of something that he wrote on his own website. In this article, he tries to make the argument that pedophiles should be added to the LGBT community. And as you can see, this article is relatively recent because he wrote it on September the 15th, 2017. The title of this article is Welcome LGBTQIP, or Psychoanalysis, Neurology, Sociology, and Pedophilia. He says here, during 40 days of my 10-month stay in prison, I spent nearly 20 to 48 hours at a time with a pedophile who had sexually abused his 20-month-old daughter. Having spent some time before prison practicing non-standard psychoanalysis, I engaged him in analysis. Closeness of space, a small cell, shared toilet, shared meals made us friends. Non-communicative at first, distrustful and distraught, suicidal and feeling a great deal of intrapersonal guilt and disgust. It took some days before he began to open up to me. We discussed the event. I kept it confidential from the other prisoners in the vulnerable prisoners wing, F wing at HMP Bedford. Even though his wing houses known sex offenders, pedophiles are at the lowest level of the prison hierarchy. UK Prison Rule 45 separates vulnerable prisoners from the general population. These prisoners may be there because of high-profile cases, for instance, Hardeep Hunjam and Ian Stewart, neither convicted of sexual offenses. I met both of them, worked with them in the quote-unquote shop, played chess with them, and Hunjam was the first person I had a conversation with in prison. His body marked in ink, and his presence demonstrated a serial frustration and an intriguing beauty. Being in prison changes the narratives behind the media's headlines. Monsters abound in contemporary discourse, usually those who commit specific interpersonal acts of violence. Almost no one engaged in systemic, economic, and military violence is imprisoned. However, addressing the signifying chains that lead some people to prison for killing an individual while allowing those who kill millions to live in luxury is the only ancillary part of this article. Bringing my own personal discomfort, at times anger and frustration, to the quote-unquote sessions I had with my pedophile cellmate, coupled with the fact I was in prison for something I didn't do, and that's bullshit, and as a result of being sexually misused myself, provided both a distortion and clarity in our work together. Yet I knew that to understand this unique individual, to understand what is so often hidden and demonized in Western society, I needed to remain non-judgmental and open. This is not to say I wasn't confrontational. During a session in the first week, I had him rethink whether or not, in retrospect, his desires should have precluded him from having children. He said, "Tony, that session, so painful, was like medicine that hurts terribly, but I think it's working. You are right. I thought about it and I should have never had children." Eventually, throughout the 40 days with him, we unraveled the complexities of existence. He had been protecting his girlfriend, who also abused their daughter, and mind you, he doesn't show you any proof of that. He's just telling you that. He refused to give information to the police that would bring a criminal case against her. I suggested, where does your responsibility lie? You are existentially responsible for your child. You are partly the reason she exists at all. You have no such connection to your girlfriend. After being transferred, I received a letter from him. That because the work we had done, and after seeing that his girlfriend would never admit to the abuse in family court. He instructed his counsel to inform the court. The girlfriend was immediately banned from contact with the child, and the case progressed. Last I heard, she had only supervised visitation. Once again, he shows no evidence of this. If there was such a case, and this case was actually tried, show the evidence. But I digress. While she may not be criminally prosecuted, an outcome that my cellmate and I did not want, he became a prison abolitionist during this time, it is almost certain that she will not have parental rights over her child. A side note, it's not very hard to become a prison abolitionist when you're in prison, but I digress. By being open, the experiences, feelings, and bonding with a pedophile, further damage against a child was prevented. So in other words, what you're saying is that because this father, whose name you did not give, whose case you did not point to, was able to tell the truth about what happened with his daughter, which by the way, once again, you haven't shown any evidence evidence that this person actually existed. But even if they did, them being a pedophile and telling the proper authorities about child abuse has no relevance, because if that person were a pedophile or not a pedophile, they could have done the exact same thing. So you somehow linking someone being a pedophile to preventing child abuse is very weak in this case, because that could have happened, be that person a pedophile or not a pedophile. And that's even if this case even happened, because once again, with other people you actually gave their names. Why is it with this guy you did not give his name? I find that to be very, very interesting. And even if you gave me his name, that wouldn't mean anything to me, and here is why. Because if this person actually existed and they are actually a pedophile who sexually abused a 20-month-old baby, and then they also saw child abuse happening that was perpetrated by the mother, then that means that this person is not only a terrible human being, but to be honest with you, for him to molest a 20-month-old baby and then have child abuse happening that he did not report, honestly, if I had my way and this person actually existed, I would advocate for the death penalty. Because not only did you sexually abuse a baby, but you also, on top of that, allowed an abusive mother to have custody of that child to abuse that child further. So while you think that you are making this pedophile look good, you're making them look even worse. But moving on, paradoxically, demonizing pedophiles does nothing to end their desires and often places them in such social isolation that they cannot seek help. That's bullshit, but whatever. The pedophile says, if I went to my GP doctor and asked for help preventing myself from acting on my desire, they would call the police. I would be prosecuted even for asking for help, he said to me. Once again, that's bullshit. I may not live in the UK, but I know you don't get locked up just for saying that you are a pedophile. You have to actually act on it. But anyways, he goes on to say, I realized that something needed to change. We both came to the conclusion that pedophilia is a sexual orientation and desires cannot be changed, but as with any sexual orientation, there are responsibilities. Non-consensual sex between adults are acts of severe violence, and there can be no consensual sexual relations between an adult and a 20-month-old child. I'm glad that he finally realizes that this guy is not a good guy for having sex with a 20-month-old baby. And no, pedophilia is not a sexual orientation. It is a mental disorder. But as you can see, this is why he has to go around spreading fake reviews of his own work. Because if he didn't, people would reject this bullshit, as they rightfully should. Now, Tony Cochran loves to claim that people are threatening him and wishing for him to be dead. And the funny thing about that is that if you go to Facebook and you look for these alleged threats, you don't find any, which is funny because if you can make a website and you can make blog posts and you know how to steal someone's credit card and try to withdraw some money, one would think that you would know how to take screenshots. Now, the only record of these so-called threats that I could remotely interpret as threats are people saying things such as they hope he dies or someone should come beat him up, which are sentiments that I don't agree with. But if Tony Cochran has such an issue with that, then he has some explaining to do. Let me show you what I mean by that. So I have an archived version of this actual Twitter user's page where it's being advertised that there is a National Police Week in Washington, D.C. on May 11th through the 17th in 2014. Now, when you look at this tweet, which is a screenshot of a Facebook comment, if you were to look down, you will see Tony Robert Cochran, and he says, I wish more of you died. So apparently he wants police officers to die. So instead of my normal outro, I will give you a statement from his victim in the UK. I want you to listen to her entire statement, and I understand that this video is very, very long, but when you look at the content of the actual video, I think you understand why it had to be this long. Without further ado, here is the audio file.
Tony